Yes, and when preparing, one of the questions was how to relate to this question, to this object of aesthetics, or to this chapter, I'm talking about chapters 2, 3 of the book. I try, of course, not to explain, not to reduce it into components. I try not to limit effects, socio-political effects on me, on people, on readers, and so on. But the question of relation, I think, how to speak about the object is one of the fundamental problems when we speak about aesthetics. And of course, we have how to do justice and to give respect to the text, to the object. Of course, we can engage with passion, with love and sincerity, as Hugo has done. It's a way to respect it. But Harman says that there needs to be a kind of equal share between the spectator and the object. And in the book, of course, we have something quite special. The first part is about the object, Dante, with, of course, you say that's your interpretation, but the object comes first, and you make the reader have a contact with the object. And in the second part, Harman comes first, and Dante is really the background. It comes from time to time, but it's really the background. So the question was how to relate, how to present, how to speak about this. I'll be closer to the first part of the book. That means, to introduce, to accompany, to make the audience to remember, to be closer to the object. Maybe one step, when we speak about the object and love for object, I think it's also very important for us. And a critique of the form. I'm in business school, trying to publish in organization studies, and I guess you've had this kind of experience where you have the feeling that your text is rejected because of form and not because of content. And you also, because you don't follow the canon of how an article has to be. And that's a question of form, of formalism. Second, all these colleagues that becomes cynical because they don't believe anymore in their object, what they profess, or as being a professor. And so this assertion that this invitation to love your object, I think is important. That's why that's from here I'm going to say. And the last point, when in business school you say that you're interested in aesthetics, usually you get some kind of smile. You know, I won't describe this. And one of the main assertions of the book is that aesthetics lies the very root of philosophy, and more than of philosophy. And that's one of the main assertions. And the contact you're gaining with the object, with aesthetics, is not about knowledge. I think that's a point that needed to be reminded. And there is a kind of avoidance of depth. That means because we can't have the object in itself, we remain on the phenomena, perception, borders of quality, relation, events, power as something outside. Fisher. And Harman is praising Socrates for not giving any knowledge. And of course, to making us relate with you. And of course, we have this contention that art is cognition without knowledge. Cognition, that's your word, but cognition is important. It's not exactly contact, it's cognition that you... And the paradox is here. I'm just paraphrasing or quoting sometimes. The more it is hard, I think it's quote, the more it presents an ongoing challenge to any interpretation, and the more it impels us to further encounters, not over and above, but under and beneath over public. Then we have here the trick. That means no direct access, and we will come back to this, of course, but the contact, the approach has to be indirect, oblique, and elliptical. And that's a question. We go. So the mood. As Harman is making us follow Dante, and make some encounters in Inferno, in Purgatory, and so on. We have the same structure, the same idea. Sorry, I can't read some, that's the problem. That's a question. Okay, very quickly, because that's just a reminder. We have first Heidegger, very quickly, because it's well known for those who have already read Harman. Then we have the Ortega coming, and then we have the bundle of Kant, Greenwood, and Krieg. Again, actually. So Heidegger won't come back on this. I think it's known, but that's important. We don't get the whole story if we don't have this starting. The starting about the hammer when it's broken, and then we recognize, oh, we have an object which is not just its quality. And where we have something different, we say that in art it goes one step further than the framework of Heidegger. So we need the following of the story. But here we just need to stop. And to get to the following, the story, Harman is making us encounter Ortega, like that. And one distinction he is making is the example of the pain. There's something incommensurable between being hurt and feeling the pain, and observing somebody, or that somebody is talking about pain. And that's where we have this oblique, that's where we have this contact with the real object that is coming. But of course, when you tell an artist, when you ask an artist what does your artwork is telling, always he gets very nervous and he really dislikes the question. Of course, it's not about telling about it. What we have here is that the artwork is about making the spectator. I keep the word spectator because we have the theatrical feel, making seem that the inwardness of things, the executant's reality is open to us. But it's open not to be seen, it's open to be executed by ourselves. I think you have got the and we have the example of the metaphor, which is, I think, quite original, really original, this idea of the understanding of the metaphor this way. And what has to be avoided here, if I understand, is the image. We often think of the metaphor of the image, and the image is the bad guy here. What we try to have is something without the image. So when we have the cypress-like frame, it's not an image, or it's not a shape, it's not something. when we hear it, what does it? What happens? And the idea is that we have this executiveness. We don't have the access to the object, of course, but we have access to something, to the real object in us, because we experience in us this executing power that the metaphor is producing. I go on. So we encountered Ortega y Gasset, and this was a key to have this insight. And of course, the metaphor is one of the elements. Then we come back to the, we have some parallel with the previous chapter about ethics, and come back with formalism, which of course is not a direct critique of formalism. It's something that we listen to formalism, we agree with formalism, and when in our journey, whoa, there's something that I don't like, I don't feel that something missing, something that I can't agree with. Okay. And here we have the three positions. Position one is Kant, where you have what's going on in art is about the universal structure of the observer. Position two is Greenberg and Fried. Fried or Fried? Fried. The aesthetic excellence lies in the object. And position three, OOO, is where the unit of the aesthetic experience is the spectator in front of or immersed with or in relations with the object. Going quite quickly.
Realize how much they look alike.
Sorry?
I never realized how much they look alike.
What's interesting that Harman don't have to justify why he chose Greenberg and Fried. And that's we don't have many pages to say that was exactly the pieces of the puzzle that was missing, and I explain all the shapes. We encounter him, as you know, we encounter him, they tell us something, and we work, with them. But that's not just, I like to have this idea of encountering. Okay, I don't want to come back to this because my idea was more to have the discussion towards us, among us.
You say no.
So we arrive at the thesis, you would say. So, first, the approach, the aesthetic unit contains the object and the spectator to the equal degree. Then, we have the story that follows. So we start again with Heidegger, with this idea of the broken hammer, where the formal, the sensual qualities of the hammer are distinguished by the real object. But here we have something that is brought by the aesthetic experience. Is that, and here we arrive at the point. When it breaks, now the object is never present, even when it breaks. And here it is replaced in aesthetic experience by the only real object that has not withdrawn, the very being of the beholder. So we don't have a contact, even, here is the obliqueness, is the undirectness. We don't have the contact with the object, of course, the real object. We never have that. But we have a contact with something which is real. And that's the point of discussion, of course. Something which is real, it's that there is something executed in me. Something going on in me, and I can feel there is something real here. We ourselves step in to do the work of the suddenly missing object, serving as a support for its quality. I come back to the word work here, and one of the main contention at the end, maybe we can discuss this as well, is art is essentially theater. Okay. So this is just a summary of what was said. And I wanted, as you said, I wanted the reader to have the same, to pick up the same elements as I do or don't. So this is what I propose that we discuss again. At 3 points of discussion, very as a discussion. It's not a critique at all. One of my first questions was when you speak, when Harman's speaking about theater, what is this idea of theater? Of course, one possibility that comes to mind is a kind of theater we have embraced. I mean, of course, we see something happening for Galileo, and then we do the work of thinking, what does this mean for us today? In our situation, we try to put ourselves in that. But okay, we have something which is, in a way, quite classical theater, when usually we have the approach. And this executing nature, power, things that's happening in us, I would have rather have a connection with performances. One example, what I could have, I don't know if you ever attended to a performance on André Lied. It's to me one of the best performers we have this woman now, she's nearly 50, 45, 50. And for example, in one piece, during 2 hours and a half, she's just on the stage, and she's speaking, screaming, being naked, doing what many. What to say? Certainly, what she's saying is, okay, the object is, okay, what is this situation? I'm over 45, I feel I'm not desirable anymore, and at the time of my life, what I'm the most feel I would need to be desirable. And she's screaming, and she's putting her body in front of us, and she's seeking the contact. She's really seeking that something is happening inside her, that this executing things. But she's seeking immediate. That's the aim. I'm not. We often have this distinction between theater and performance. Theater, it's more about imitation, mimesis, okay? And we have, I am the actor, but I play the character, and there is a story performed on the stage. The performance is more, something is really happening on the stage, and something has to happen in you, collectively or individually. And so this contact with this real I. As an actor, okay, the actors are spending days and days, nearly all of their occupation, to try to have this connection between this sensual I that is on the stage and this real I, whatever it is. And also all this what's happening when you attend to such a performance inside this executing thing? So this connection, when I'm coming back to this. And isn't it too easy to say that's the real I that is at the executive? Can't it be a kind of inauthentic I? Or self-deceptive I? Or there is unconscious I, which may be the real I, I don't know. Or I say a 0% I. That's a question. About the relation of the spectator and the piece of art. There is something which is at a distance. I observe. It's more visual art. The example you take. It's more visual art, and then we. To make my point, I would make a parallel with Deleuze, this idea of art, because there is something very similar. We say art has not to be understood but to be experienced. To me, there's something that is not totally different, but there is something very physical that happens between the piece of art and the spectator. He speaks about the effect on the flesh, the effect on speed, intensity, body deformation, and there is something that forces us to think. There's something very physical, something that happens between the artwork and the spectator. And maybe that's where we could have the political, the historical, many things are reoccurring here. And so, if there's something, okay, what's the nature of this connection? The art of work and is there something, because it can be very proper, very neat. So it was the French word, proper is a very word. Something very clean. Okay, that's a question. And very, it's really, I have no clue. That I'm very, very interested in your answer on that. When you say that there is a work. Can I come back? Yes, the quotation. We ourselves step in to do the work of the suddenly missing object, serving as a support for the quality. So, there is a something's working inside of us, the executing power. And you say that we work in the place of the art. What is work? Okay, and I leave the last question about the literary work, writing. But what that work? That's really not. I stop here.
Thank you.
Given being confronted by direct questions, I guess it's.
Yeah, I'll just go straight to those questions. One I never thought of, and it's a very good question. Isn't it too easy to say that the real I is the one that's involved in art? Actually, maybe I should give a little background so we all make sure we all understand what I'm saying by this. The reason I take Jose Ortega-Gasset's analysis of metaphor and try to push it a few steps further, and he gives that example of the cypress and a flame. The original Spanish poetry it's a longer metaphor. The cypress is like the ghost of a dead flame, and he simplifies it by saying the cypress is a flame. How does that work? He says it cannot be a direct likeness between the two, because that doesn't give you a metaphor. If I say this pen is like a pencil, it's not a metaphor. Let's say 1 pound sterling is like a cent, $1.37 or whatever it is, I've lost track. It's not a metaphor, it's a direct exchange value. So you need a comparison that's not too close or too far. If it's too close, it's a literal statement. If it's too far, it's called a catachresis, I guess. The one I heard as a graduate student that I still love is drinking a milkshake is like drawing an isosceles triangle. Which I guess could be made to work by some literary genius that frames it the right way, but most of the time it's not going to work. There's not enough there to make it put the two together. So that's one thing. The other thing is that you cannot reverse metaphors. You cannot, in Homer's famous Wine Dark Sea, you cannot reverse that to C dark wine without making it a metaphor. In the first case, C is the subject and it brings in wine qualities. In the second case, the wine is the subject and it brings C qualities. So that's another thing about metaphor, that he actually misses that point. In one place he says, and vice versa, so he misses that you could not reverse it. Because one is in the object position and the other is in the qualities position, that gives us the third fact about metaphor. The fact that when you say wine dark C, you have a C that brings in wine dark qualities, which aren't just the literal qualities of wine, like the color, darkness, but also it's implying that the C also has inebriation and danger and adventure and disinhibition and all the other things we associate with wine. You can never literally paraphrase a metaphor, as the direct critics have shown. It's, in those terms, it's like you know, take a three-dimensional globe and flatten it on a two-dimensional map. There's going to be distortion. So, and then the final step I ended up with here is the idea that, like I said, it seems like we're getting at the real thing. When you've got the C trying to absorb wine dark qualities, our mind knows it doesn't work. So there's a separation between the two. The C becomes this thing that's resisting those wine qualities. It's kind of withdrawing into the darkness. So it seems like we're seeing the real C, even though we don't. My thesis is that since the C has vanished, because all objects in triple O vanish if they're real objects, you can't have qualities in triple O floating in a void with no object. That's just what we take from phenomenology. There's only one object left on the scene, and that's me. It's the real object, the holder, the reader. And this fits nicely with what in literary criticism is called reader response theory. So some of the work has already been done on that in literature more than in visual arts. And it works against Michael Fried's claim in visual arts that theatricality should be avoided because we want the object not to contaminate with the human. Instead, every metaphor and every aesthetic object more generally requires me to stand in for the missing link on object. That's why it feels more genuine in non-aesthetic experience. Now, Jean-Luc raises a very important question. How do we know that it's the real I that's involved? The zero-person I, which is a term I coined once. Zero-person I mean the I that's not describable from the outside by you and also not describable from the inside by me. I have no special access to myself. That's why there's psychoanalysts. We don't understand ourselves any more than other people. So, zero-person is just me as I really am, not looked at by anybody. How do I know that that's the one being involved? And I suppose the answer is we don't. And there could be naively sentimental experiences of artwork and criticism tries to be wrong, and it should. We can and should critique art for being overly sincere. The problem is I think in modernism that's gone way too far. And any sign of sincerity has been viewed as a plague. We're hearing once that somebody was in a comparative literature class at one of the great American universities, and they were expressing a lot of passion about the text. They were being sneered at by only their students as though that was some kind of vulgar gaffe to have passion for the text. Maybe you were getting something about this in Chicago as well. So yeah, everything is supposed to be one step more cynical, one step more critical than thou. And that's something we're probably moving away from just because it's so exhausting. And that also deals with part of Jean-Luc's second question, which he says, are love and sincerity enough to write text? No, because again, you can write naively sentimental stuff, and a lot of writers probably start that way in their teenage years. So you need to practice critical intelligence, you need feedback from other writers. You need to see that much of what you're writing at first is cliche and has been done already, or discover your own fresh voice if you ever do. But so, yeah, there could be plenty of inauthenticity there because we don't have any direct access to ourselves. We don't know the zero-person self any longer. We know reality is vast. It takes a long time to develop a strong authorial voice or aesthetic vision of any kind. As far as Deleuze saying art is not to be understood but to be experienced, I'd agree with that. I'm not sure that's different from what Kant's already said. You cannot paraphrase an artwork to anybody else. It must be experienced by taste. And in principle, all aesthetic taste, if it's trained enough, should converge. As Kant makes the famous point that none of us demand agreement with our taste in food or clothing. With art, it's different. We are almost appalled if somebody doesn't agree with us that Beethoven's Ninth is beautiful, whatever work it is that we think is a great work. Whereas I don't really care if somebody doesn't like Indian food as much as I do. Do what you want. It doesn't bother me at all. Certain kind of aesthetic experience, we do expect other people to agree with us. We question their judgment and taste, and they don't. Some of them. So, I felt like I was to say one other thing about. Oh, you also said I didn't justify why I picked Greenberg and Reed. I probably should have done that a little more. They're in the background of most of the American discourse so much that I should have realized that Clement Greenberg, his career occurred at a very interesting time in American art history, which was, he began his critical work in the 30s, when American art was really a backwater. And he writes a lot of articles complaining about that. You know, why don't we have anything interesting here that's going on in Europe? Paris is still where everything's happening. Our stuff is really provincial by comparison. And there are a few people who show flashes of talent, and but on the whole, he's very depressed about the American art scene. Most of his articles are making fun of the stuff he sees at shows. And then suddenly, in the late 40s, he becomes very excited. His famous move of advanced arts in New York after the war, for various reasons. And Greenberg was the first champion of Jackson Pollock, even when he was still being ridiculed over here. And this was really the period when Greenberg was flourishing, from say 1948, when Pollock became big, up until the very early 60s. There was this generation of dominance. Such dominance as a critic that bred a lot of resentment. And he's still there. He's still, I think he's one of the finest prose writers of the 20th century. I put him up there with Freud and a few others, not in the nonfiction category. He writes short reviews. They're generally in target. He started to lose popularity in the 60s when his formalism was flouted by people like Warhol, like the minimalists, like conceptual arts, like performance arts. And he's never really recovered. I mean, he's classic, but he's the only name I've ever read in a lecture that received a hiss. I was in Berlin giving a lecture 5 years ago, and I mentioned Heidegger, who's, I don't see anything that in Berlin, there'd be some worries about that. No, nobody said anything about Heidegger. He's so popular in some parts of Germany. As soon as I said Greenberg, hiss came from the third row, very loudly, the whole auditorium could hear. And I think it's because a lot of artists feel that he was unduly constraining their profession, and now they've all broken free from the bonds. And I would agree that his formalism is of the wrong kind. It's this idea that human and object should not be tangled, so therefore performance art is ipso facto non-legitimate for Greenberg against that. The same with anything that involves a human spectator. Freed even more so. Freed is still alive and still influential in some way. So they are really kind of forming the background of the debate, just as, in a way, the new critics of literary criticism are forming the background of the American debates. Their idea being this kind of aestheticist idea, the social and political ramifications, the content of the artwork doesn't matter as much as its formal structure. It's kind of laid the groundwork for deconstruction coming in, actually, in America. And that also was believed to have been refuted by the 1960s concern with social political justice and these sorts of other concerns, not just letting white males dominate the literary scene, because these new critics were white aristocratic servant gentlemen being served by black waiters at their gatherings. It was a very aristocratic elite sort of group. So all those concerns are legitimate, but I think they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. The formalist point that needs to be preserved is this autonomy of context. As soon as you let an artwork dissolve into its context, it's gone. I mean, yes, you can allow some parts of the context to come in. There are some works for which context is deeply important. But it's also the case that you can pick up Shakespeare and put it in the year 2017 in Malaysia and it's a hit. There's something about great art that you can move around in different contexts other than the ones in which it was created, the audience for which it was written. So that's the sense in which I want to preserve the formalist insights, but there's this problem that they think human and world must never mix. And that's really the root of all the Kantian problems that I talk about. So, but I love this question about how do you make sure that the real eye is involved in it. There's one that just did not occur to me already in the book. It's a topic that we developed, I think. It's something the critic has to do, and it's something the writer has to do in self-critique, is figure out how the real eye is involved. Yep.
Thank you. Well, I have a
question just related to your question, your answer to I mean, in the previous section, I just was going to ask what the question about potential. Then I now figure out the question to this section, and which is something to do with previous readings of Greenberg's essays on automated statics, and actually one of them, maybe two of those essays, talking about this notion of decision, how do we choose or decide things which will end up having this aesthetic effect, remarkable effects on us. Then maybe we can put pretension or to pretend or to seem into the play at this point. But this is going to be a little bit formalist for your taste. I think that what you do, I mean, because you refer to the idea of my mimesis, at some point, it began, the children do, by pretending that you like objects, but you don't have any sincere connection, or any connection at all, any knowledge, for example, about the equalities, right? So you pretend to have something in mind when in front of those objects. And maybe this is, one might call, kind of the basic mimetic move, and therefore the first thing to do to form a unit. There is no unit to speak of, but you pretend that there is. So if there is no pretension at the very outset, then there won't be any decision afterwards. Therefore, in order to choose something, for example, like Greenberg does when he chooses Henri Matisse, for example, you need to pretend that you like the paintings of Matisse. Therefore, the real I, whatever it is, or the zero level I, or zero I, is something that you form out of all these pretensions. Of course, I mean, you cannot form or exhaust, as you suggest, every possible pretensions that come up at the end in this full-blown I, the real I, whatever it might be again. But you build your own I based on all those self-deceptive I's, unconscious I's, and so on and so forth. So, I guess, and since you were talking about taxonomy and ontotaxonomic kind of fallacy all the time, you're making a taxonomy of your own at some point between different disciplines, among the disciplines. I mean, art, science, philosophy, usually the three great disciplines that any philosopher, you know, like Deleuze talks about when he's considering something of utmost importance concerning, let's say, the fate of thinking. So you put art at the forefront or at the very kind of top, since aesthetics should be the first philosophy. Is first philosophy, you say, but it's also, there's a kind of a manifesto-like quality to almost everything that you write, that we should accept this to begin with, right? So therefore, for example, science, when we come to science, and of course I'm not a scientist, but at some point I was a physics student, and when you get together with physicists, I mean, the people with the utmost kind of passion for their own work are not usually the ones with the greatest, let's say, talent. And of course, this is a very straightforward and maybe even a banal example, but I watched this movie called The Man Who Knew Infinity about two mathematicians. One, G.H. Hardy, the other is Srinivasa Ramanujan. So Ramanujan was a Indian mathematician who was invited to Cambridge to work with Hardy on arithmetics, number theory. And Ramanujan is so fast for the taste of Hardy. He does not quite have time to spend on proving the conjectures that he somehow comes up with about the numbers. He tells Hardy that he's for sure, he knows that those conjectures are true. But, of course, Hardy does not accept such a fast calculus and demands to see some proof of all these mathematical ideas, which is something like a burden for Ramanujan. Just tell me, just pour all these ideas out to feel free, maybe because I have such kind of connection with mathematical objects that they are coming so fast that I need to write them down first to kind of guard them, to preserve them in some form. But he tells Ramanujan that this is no way to do decent mathematics. He needs to prove all these things, and he needs to take his time to make all these proofs, so that the others also can understand. So my question, or my kind of intervention, I'm sorry, just getting a little bit long, but 2 points, I guess. Pretension might be the foremost, as you actually talk about theater and mask, wearing might be the quintessential artistic movement. Yes, but it is kind of built on the idea of pretension. Therefore, it is pretension that we should put at the very beginning and not sincerity. And the second one is, of course, about the taxonomy of different disciplines. We need to look at each discipline how they work closely to really see what is going on there. And of course, my kind of tiny example, the relationship between Hardy and Ramanujan, for example, might help in reconsidering that taxonomy. Thanks.
There's a lot there, that's very interesting. Let me start by saying, in a sense, yes, what I do with art, science, and philosophy is a taxonomy. And that's mostly for polemical value. The polemical value is that in large parts of the philosophical world, science is worshipped and art is treated as a sort of decoration. There have been only a handful of philosophers who took aesthetics seriously as a central discipline. And Schopenhauer, and Kant, at least I wrote a book to it, and a few others, Aristotle, Poetics. And so, in part, that's an effort to provoke people, to stop assuming that science is the standard of all cognition. Maybe the standard of knowledge, but there are forms of cognition that are not knowledge. I would not say philosophy and art produce knowledge. They produce something else. And in fact, you can see what I call scientific aspects in arts. Art does teach you things also. I wouldn't say that's its primary value, but it does also teach us things. We can learn from art. And likewise, there is aesthetic experience in science, I think very importantly so. And Zizek makes a very funny and true points when he says that no artist today will be caught dead talking about beauty. That would be the biggest gaffe. Like if you put up your piece at the Biennale and said, I made this because it's beautiful, they would laugh at you, they would smirk the whole time. It's scientists who talk about beauty now. The cosmos is so beautiful and DNA structure is so beautiful. And whereas art is about reality, like Damien Hirst putting a chunk of beef and having flies come to eat it and be electrocuted. This is art, right? Just the contact with the real. And so they've kind of reversed, as binary systems often do, they flip qualities. Just like at the time of the French Revolution, it was the right that was socially constructionist, and the left, the revolutionaries, that appealed to nature. And now that's flipped. So now the left gives to appeal to social construction, and the right appeals to nature. That'll keep orbiting. The systems like that always do that every century or so. The Republican Party was the anti-slavery party in the U.S. originally. It's kind of flipped. So, yes, I admit that there are. Yes, if you had me be perfectly correct and systematic, I would not be saying that art exemplifies aesthetics 100% and science exemplifies knowledge 100%, because these institutional practices both borrow from the other. I just take them as fairly exemplary because, for the most part, art succeeds by way of aesthetics, and you cannot paraphrase it in terms of a discovery. Whereas, for the most part, science works by trying to produce knowledge. The aesthetic part of it is maybe secondary. Okay, so that's so much for the taxonomy question for now. As for pretension coming before sincerity, yes, even in ethics. Aristotle says the way you become good is by imitating good people, which is paradoxical, because you're pretending to be good before you're actually good. And that's what it means to imitate a model. And there's this wonderful part in one of Poe's short stories, one of his detective stories, where he talks about a little boy who's able to read people's minds. And the way he reads people's minds is by copying their facial expression and see what thoughts come into his mind as a result of the expression. And it sort of works if you try it. You have to go away and hide before you imitate their facial expression. sometimes helps you understand their state of mind.
They've done experiments on it. Psychologists where they get people to smile, and I can't remember how they do it, and it does.
It does make you happier?
You know, yeah. The facial expressions associated with happiness encourage happiness.
So fake smiling actually has a purpose. Yeah. Fake kindness might make you a kinder person. Fake honesty might make you more honest. Yeah. And of course, as a student, you're always in the position of pretension, right? Because you're always just starting and mastering the basics, and so you're trying to be like the heroes of the profession or the models. And as a result, everybody gets imposter syndrome. Because they start out as imposters and they never outgrow that, and they never feel that they're the real thing. Because they're used to just copying the masters. So I would agree in a sense that pretension comes before sincerity. But you have to, what did Miles Davis say? It took me a long time before I could play like myself. Because our development does happen on the outside more than on the inside. Right? If you figure out the main steps in your personal development, they usually involve other people, objects, or institutions. Very little of it is from introspection. It often leads nowhere. Spin your wheels there. It's by mediating yourself through the outside that you gain yourself. Sounds like a nice Hegelian theme. Okay, as for mimesis and pretension, this is interesting too, because Jean-Luc was asking why I didn't make more of a theatrical sense of mimesis. I thought I was. Maybe it wasn't clear enough. This is why I think I mentioned Stanislavski. I didn't? Oh, and other essays. I didn't mention it. Because, Stanislavski is famous for what we call the method in the US. They actually call it the system in Russia, where you are somehow becoming the person. So Marlon Brando is a great example of this. Marlon Brando showed up for his audition for The Godfather already in character. Right? It's a typical method thing to do. Or for On the Waterfront, he wanted these big bulky forearms to look like a longshoreman, so he'd shimmy up ropes using only his arms for several months at a time. It's classic actor techniques. You're living a character. You hear people say Heath Ledger died because he got inside the Joker too much and it drove him crazy. Who knows? But so the idea is you are trying to become the character. You're trying to sincerely become the character. And yes, I guess there is some pretension in that. But here's the interesting thing. Mimesis is a fairly discredited notion in aesthetics, because it sounds like this old-fashioned thing that art is a copy of reality, and that abstract painting is supposed to question this, because it's not making copies of real things. But there's two senses of imitation. Imitation meaning making imitations of other stuff, and the other sense meaning you're imitating something. And it's that second sense that I like. And I think actors know so well that you're becoming something. Daniel Day-Lewis's Lincoln was fantastic, I thought. I even thought Anthony Hopkins' Nixon was good, even though he didn't look like Nixon at all. It was still pretty good. But yeah, this is kind of mimesis. You're right, there is a pretension at the root of all mimesis, because Marlon Brando is not the Godfather. So no matter how well he does it, he's pretending to be somebody he's not, sure. But without that, there wouldn't be the metaphorical effect. You would just say a cypress is a cypress, Marlon Brando is Marlon Brando. There wouldn't be that crossing of two different things. And I guess there's a pretension in saying a cypress is a flame. Because no, it's not. Oh, it says a cypress is like the ghost of a dead flame. You can just say no. So there needs to be a suspension of disbelief and a certain root pretension, yeah.
Both brought to mind something from the odious Tory politician Alan Clark's diaries. So apparently it was an old family tradition that the way in which you looked benign when you were meeting the great unwashed was you mutter the word brush under your breath, and it produces the appropriate facial expression and countenance to look as if you're concerned. Brush, brush, brush. So if any of you are going to meet the great unwashed in the next few days, that's the way to look comfortable with them. Anybody else? I think we've probably got about another 5 minutes before. Go ahead.
Just on the kind of coming off the taxonomical question. I think this was during one of the lectures you gave at European Graduate School. You mentioned that you were interested in reintegrating knowledge into a because you felt like you borrowed from Heidegger too much in these, especially science and technology and all that. How's that going, basically?
I had to touch on it a little. I've written an introduction to for Pelican. It's going to be out this fall. They pushed it back to spring for marketing reasons. I do have a section in there on knowledge. I'm not happy with it. It's the part of the book I'm least happy with because I think there's a lot more to be said. But basically, the triple O conception is that knowledge is always a form of undermining or overmining. You're either You're reducing a thing to its pieces, you're reducing a thing to its effects, because there are really only two kinds of knowledge. If somebody asks you what something is, you can answer by what it's made of, or you can answer by what it does. And so many more philosophers than they realize that philosophy is boiled down to that. Starting in ancient times, Parmenides says being is one, if you use logos, but then there's also this many, it's the illusion, the appearance. So you have to account for both of those. Real things in between are not accounted for. Just the bottom level and the top level are accounted for. More recently, Patricia Churchland, who kind of started out as this ultra-reductionist philosopher of mind, has now adopted more this position of doing both, dual mining as I call it. So she'll say, yes, on the level of neural activation patterns, on the level of the brain, we can eliminate stuff. But on the level of folk psychology, which is where we say, oh, I'm happy because I'm feeling at peace with my life, that's just folk psychology according to the church, and we can't get rid of it. Or Eddington's famous two tables, which I talked about in the essay, the third table. There's two tables here, there are two tables, one is made of atoms and electrons spinning mostly empty space, the other is the practical hard table with a certain color, and you can't get rid of that one. That's just reducing the table in two directions simultaneously. The real table is the one between those. And I was trying to say the arts are what get at that. Now, so knowledge is a form of dual mining. It's either reduction downward or upward. Now, it occurred to me a few years ago that, yes, but we still need knowledge. I mean, the human race would die without knowledge, so you can't have it all be about this oblique elliptical approach to a thing in itself, because if I'm sick, I'm going to choose the best hospital I can, the best doctor I can, and not just choose randomly. I'm not going to go to a shaman, or I like going to acupuncturist, but I'm not going to go if I have cancer, right? I might go for pain relief, but I'm not going to go as my only treatment, or a car accident, go to an acupuncturist. No, I'm going to go to a hospital. And I'm going to choose the best map I can of a city based on which one has the best reputation. And so there is something like knowledge. And what that means, of course, is that some dual mining is better than others. So you have to account for why some dual mining is better than others. It's still not getting us the thing itself, but it's getting us something like that. And again, I've overemphasized the anti-knowledge sign mostly as a polemical technique, because there's such this widespread assumption that philosophy is a form of knowledge. And for the last 400 years, we thought philosophy is supposed to be more like science and more like geometry. And even my friend Morieau tries to construct his philosophy like a geometrical proof. Right? He starts with the first step, it's unshakable, and then moves on to the second step, moves on to the third. And it's really from Whitehead that I learned you don't have to take that too seriously. Only rarely does philosophy work like a geometrical proof of deductions. Philosophy is descriptive generalization, and you're going to be wrong about some stuff. It's not like geometry where if your first assumption is wrong, then the whole proof collapses. I think Spinoza's first few assumptions are totally wrong, and yet it's still a really interesting philosophy. I don't think the entire universe is God or nature, one substance. And yet he's still one of the most interesting philosophers who ever lived, because he gives us lots of other things that follow from that. And so you can't just say, oh, Spinoza's refuted. It's out of date. Yeah, it is, but that doesn't really tell the whole story the way it would with an old system of physics. So it's not as far along as I would like, but it's right there on my table as something I'm working on. Yeah, so it needs to be done.
Hi. So just in relation to that, like I'm really interested, because there's quite a few points in this text where you refer to Lacan or to Freud, but then they disappear at times that I think that they might pop up. So I'm really interested in what the difference is between duomining and Lacan's kind of theory about excellence, and like these kind of external internalities and internal externalities. That kind of that seems to kind of tread the same path, and I'm confused about what the distinction is between them.
Yeah. My relation to psychoanalysis is that I'm fascinated by it, and I'd rather read psychoanalysis than anything else, but I'm just not sure yet how to integrate it into the philosophy part, and I want to not make false steps with that. My whole spring seminar was on Freud and Lacan, so I must be working towards doing something with that. And as far as Lacan, I find him immensely witty, not as good a writer as Freud, of course. It's a lot more confusing, but insightful, but I just don't like the ontology in the end. It's too anti-realist for me. And that gives him some benefits psychoanalytically, whereas I like Freud's treatment of the unconscious better, that it is a real thing. Just as I like Kant better than Hegel. In fact, the thing in itself is there in Kant, just as the unconscious is really there in Freud. Zizek says Hegel overcomes Kant in the same way as Lacan overcomes Freud by getting rid of this in itself, putting it all immanent on the level of language. So I would tend to call Lacan a duo miner, or an over miner like Zizek. I know people might think that this is just name calling, but it's not, because I have a very precise definition of what I mean by both of those things. That if you're trying to get rid of the hidden stuff in favor of its surface manifestations, well, you know, Lacan is basically a structuralist and Zizek is basically a Lacanian. There's a sense in which there is no hidden depth. I mean, Lacan is the real, but again, it's always part of the three-link chain. It's tied up with this, there's no real without the symbolic and the imaginary. So it's not really the hidden real in the sense of truth, which exists even if there is no symbolic or imaginary. So there's that difference. What I love about Freud is the theory of translation he gives us, which is also Latour's strength. The idea that in the dream work you can see how something was translated into this, and that was translated into this, and translated into this neurosis. And he's such a wonderful detective trying to figure out how that happens. And eventually covers the whole sphere of culture for Freud. I think what I like about Lacan is the way he gives a kind of diagrammatic, systematic rigor to his insights. He gives a cleaner presentation than Freud does in some ways. And I compare, Isabel Stingers compares reading Whitehead to whale watching, right? She says most of the time it's really boring, and then all of a sudden, there she goes, there's the whale. It's a wonderful sentence, or paragraph that comes out of Whitehead, the rest is a bore. For me, Lacan is, the metaphor is panning for gold. You get this pan, and there's lots of mud and water, and then once in a while you get these wonderful nuggets of gold. And some of his sentences are the most beautiful aphorisms you can think about. What I love is, the hero is one who can be betrayed with impunity. And I love that. He talks about that in relation to Antigone. What makes Antigone a hero is that she's betrayed with impunity. The people who kill her are never really fully punished as they ought to be. There seems to be a lot hidden in that gem. And every few chapters he's got something like that, something you've never heard before from anybody else. So I like that. But yeah, eventually you'll see me working on psychoanalysis more just because I love it. I mean, it took me how many years to get back to Dante? Dante's been, since 1988, was boiling in the back of my mind. It took an opportunity to, what usually happens with me at least, is the publisher says, do you want to write something for us? And I'll pick one of those boiling ideas in the back of my mind. And in the case of Peter, I knew the editors, and they wanted some authors, they were just starting up. I said, how about Dante? I've been thinking about that for 28 years. And they said, sure. So then you have this book.
So just to be clear when I'm going to, because I want to write something.
Oh.
Like it's like, so the difference you're saying is that Lacan uses the symbolic too much, and therefore he's not a realist. And so the way that Neuromining moves away from the kind of theories of like subjectivity being formed from the bottom up and from the top down is that you feel that they're not realist.
Yeah, I think that in Lacan and Zizek, what I see is a kind of realist alibi. They say we're not idealists because there's the real, there's the shock and trauma, there's unsymbolizable, this traumatic kernel. But that's not really what reality is about. Reality also affects itself. It doesn't just shock us. It's got other things to do besides that.
Yeah.
It's one good signal of the real if you're shocked or traumatized by something. But it doesn't, it's not a very strong sense of the real if that's what they think it does. It's surprise us, stun us. Even Heidegger, it's the same sort of thing, angst, being towards death, that's the real because it's shocking and surprising us. I think you get all these philosophers who think they're beyond modern dualism because they tangle up human and world with each other. You got that in Schelling, you got that in Merleau-Ponty, and incidentally, these are the philosophers who are always called the philosophers of the future. But I would say what people sometimes say about Brazil, which is that these are the philosophers of the future and they always will be. Schelling and Merleau-Ponty. Because what's there is not what you're looking for. They think that what's there is some new approach to reality, but it's not really there. It's just, Merleau-Ponty says the world looks at me just as I look at it. Well, that's a good step, but why are we just looking at each other? Why are parts of the world looking at each other? That's what we need to get to. And so it seems that most of the philosophies that think they're beyond modernity are an attempt to simply entangle those two, but human is always involved. Just like in the hybrid of Latour, the human is always there. There are a few passages where Latour gets beyond that. For the most part, he thinks the human's always involved. And, sorry?
Aesthetics in text, very much involved.
It has to be. And same with chess and same with basketball and human society, and that's fine. There are some, just like all organic chemicals need carbon in them, all human things need humans in them. Right? I'm not saying there should be art without humans or chess without humans. But there can be. That doesn't mean that there's not water without humans, and it doesn't mean that there's not mountains without humans. Because these things interact even if we're not part of the compound. And that's the kind of realism we've lost, I think. Psychoanalysis is a tricky one, though, because psychoanalysis in a way has to focus on the humans, just like art does. I guess you could psychoanalyze pets. There are a few passages where Freud and Lacan try this out. And another great Lacanian aphorism: animals can pretend, but they can't pretend to pretend. Right? The deer can try to trick you that it went left instead of right, but a human can try to trick you that they went left even though they did go left. That's what makes us human. I think that's a wonderful way of looking at us. We have the ability to lie about lying, whereas animals can only lie.
I think we should be being towards lunch.
Okay.
Thank you very much.